We'll see how that goes over. So as you may have caught in that song, Matthew highlights 5 women in the genealogical record of Jesus. Noticeably missing from the genealogical record of Jesus are some of the great heroines of Israel's faith, women like Deborah and Abigail and Esther. Even more surprisingly absent are the great matriarchs of the faith, Sarah and Rebecca and Rachel. And the question is, why did these 5 women get mentioned by name? Why Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba and Mary? What do these 5 have in common? And the answer is that these 5 women all came into the story of Jesus in strange and unique, even scandalous ways. That's why this holiday series is called A Holiday Scandal. If you look at these 5 women, what you see is that God preserved the line of Christ in a way that no one would have expected and through people whom no one could have anticipated. These are women who were disgraced, who should have been discarded and lost to the dustbin of history. But God had a bigger plan in store. God was getting ready to write out of human mess a masterpiece of his grace. And that is why this morning's message is called God Makes a Masterpiece from Our Mess. We're going to see how God takes the mess in which these women were involved and how God rewrites their story into something much greater. And we're going to start with Tamar's story. Her story is recorded in Genesis chapter 38. If you have a copy of God's Word, you might want to follow along in Genesis 38 as we go through that story. What you're going to notice is we're not going to read all 30 verses of this story. A couple reasons for that. First reason is that it's pretty long. The second reason, just being quite honest with you, is we're going to try and PG-ify some things in the scriptures that are not necessarily PG. You can go back and catch those on your own as you read the story later. But Tamar was a person whose life needed to be transformed by the grace of God. Let's discuss Tamar's life, beginning with this thought. Tamar's life was a mess. There were 3 reasons that Tamar's life was a mess. You can see them in the text of Scripture. Don't get too excited about this, relating to it too much, ladies, but the first reason that Tamar's life was a mess is because her husbands were worthless. Now, that could better be said that her husbands were idiots, but I thought maybe we'd tone it down just a bit. So Tamar marries into God's chosen people. Remember, God gave his promises. I'm going to make a great nation out of you to a guy named Abraham. And Abraham had Isaac, who had Jacob, who had Judah. And so now we're now on generation number 5. And Judah has 3 sons. He has and then he has Onan, and then he kind of has a surprise baby later, a much younger son, and that was Shelah. And so Judah's got these 3 boys, and Tamar marries the oldest of these 3 boys named Now, we don't know much about in Scripture. It just tells us here in verse 7, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. So it's actually a pun in the original language because if you flip his name around backwards, is Ray. And so it just says that right in Scripture, Ray. And what it actually means is was a wicked, worthless fellow. I'm not sure exactly what he did. We're not told in the text of the Bible. But I picture him as this raging, hateful, alcoholic, abusive kind of person. In fact, so ridiculous was he that the Scripture tells us that God put him to death. Now, that's actually fairly uncommon in the Old Testament. God does not regularly put people to death because of their sin. But was so out of bounds, so out of control, you're like, he didn't do something minor, right? Like, he didn't just drive his donkey 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. Like, he was doing some really bad stuff, and God's like, enough with you, be dead. And so was gone. So Tamar has been married to this putz for a number of years, and what she probably needs is some PTSD counseling to recover from the trauma that's been inflicted on her by being connected to such a worthless dude. But instead of getting counseling, what she gets is a marriage to the guy's brother, because that was the custom back in the ancient Near East. It was called levirate marriage, and the word levir in Hebrew actually means brother-in-law, and here's what levirate marriage is. The idea is if a husband and a wife are married, but the husband dies, he's not able to perpetuate his family line, so his brother marries the widow and has a child with her, and the resultant child is considered not the result of the man who actually fathered him, but as the offspring of the deceased man. And so Onan now steps up to the plate and is supposed to have a child with Tamar who will be the named descendant of But here's the problem with that. Onan can kind of do math. And Onan's doing inheritance math. And here's what he's thinking. He's like, the oldest son is out of the way, so now I only need to split dad's inheritance. And dad was pretty well off, right? Because he was blessed by God in the line of Abraham. And he's like, I can split the inheritance with just my younger brother Shelah. Or if I have a baby with this Tamar, my brother's widow, I'm going to have to include this baby as though he was my brother and split the inheritance 3 ways. And Onan's like, do I want to split the inheritance 2 ways, or do I want to split the inheritance 3 ways? And so he did what any selfish putz would do and decided not to have a baby with his brother's widow. You can read the specifics there in the text, but let's just say he practiced an ancient form of birth control to make sure that Tamar didn't get pregnant. Tamar was a victim. First, she was married to a bad man, and then she was married to a selfish man. When men who are supposed to be in covenant relationship with God live for themselves and the world instead of God, it's often women who are hurt. And that's what was happening to Tamar. So Tamar's life was a mess because her husbands were worthless. Here's the second reason her life was a mess. Her life was a mess because she had no sons. Inheritance, as you probably picked up as I shared, inheritance passed through the male descendants only. So to have a son meant you could have an inheritance. As an aging woman, having sons meant you had people who had resources to provide for you in your waning years. And so here's Tamar facing the prospect of aging with no son to care for her. No inheritance meant no money. No inheritance meant no security. It meant that bad times were coming for Tamar. Well, God saw what Onan was doing and how he refused to provide a son for Tamar. And so God had enough of Onan, just as he'd had enough of his brother And so eventually, God let Onan die. He put him to death as well. So Judah's sons are now 0 for 2 in having a descendant with Tamar. And Judah's looking around and thinking, okay, I had 3 sons, and son 1 was married to this woman and died. Son 2 was married to this woman and died. The problem must be the woman. Do you know any parents like that? Like, no matter what their kid does, it's always the other person's fault. And so that's what Judah was thinking, right? It can't be my boys. It's got to be her. And so he decides that he's not going to give his 3rd son, Shelah, to this woman. Now, at this point in the story, remember, Shelah's much younger. So levirate marriage is supposed to happen, but levirate marriage can't happen because Shelah's like 8. And so that wouldn't be a super awesome marriage. And so, well, here's what it says in the text, verse 11. And then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. What he's really saying is, go move back in with your dad, and hopefully you'll move on. Hopefully over the course of a decade while my son grows up, you'll figure out something else to do with your life, and you'll forget about my family. And so Judah's like, just be gone. Why? Because he feared that his son would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Here's a third reason that Tamar's life was a mess. Her fiance wasn't really her fiance. Judah had zero intention of giving son number 3 to Tamar. He's like, Shayla's going to grow up and he's going to find a much better woman to marry than this woman. Now, he's kind of telling her, like, just hang out at your dad's house, and eventually my son's going to grow up, and then we can do the cougar thing, because, you'll be old and he'll be young, and you can get together. But just wait. But what he's really thinking is that is never, ever, ever, ever going to happen. Here's the thing. The family line was in peril. The genealogy of Jesus was written through natural human birth after natural human birth after natural human birth. And I don't think any of the women who gave birth to these people, these men in the line, knew the significance of the child that was being born at the time the child was being born. But I think God knew, and even beyond that, I think Satan knew. And Satan wanted nothing more than to sniff out and then snuff out God's plan of redemption by stopping the family line. God wanted it to be that the progeny of promise would be born generation after generation after generation. But just 5 generations in, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah's sons were not having boys. And so it appeared that Judah's family line was going to stop. And Satan was celebrating his win, because Satan wanted nothing. He didn't care how. Whether it was enticing sinful rebellion, premature death, barrenness, Satan just wanted something to interrupt the line that was leading to the birth of Jesus Christ. Because after the first sin in the garden, God said, there will come a seed of the woman that will crush the seed of the snake. And the snake wanted nothing more than to stop the seed of the woman from being born, who would eventually crush him. But God had a plan. And God's plan was that though the snake tried to snuff out the line of promise, God would continue the line of promise in unexpected, almost shocking ways. And he would do that so that his grace and his mercy would be on display. And that was what is going to happen in the life of Tamar. But the family line was in peril. The name was in danger of being stopped. Now, see, I can really relate to that. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my family. So if we talk about my father and my grandfather, his dad, my grandpa was named Donald Reed Harris. He was orphaned at age 9. He lost his mom at age 2, and he lost his dad to a sickness at age 9. He was sent to live in southern Ohio in an orphan farm. He had no family roots. He eventually entered the military and was trained as a fighter pilot. He was due to be deployed to World War II. A week before his deployment was to happen, we dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, and the war ended. And so my grandpa returned back to Ohio, and he wanted to put down some family roots, having not experienced those. He married my grandma, and they had 5 kids. Now, my family's really good at having girls, not super good at having boys. So my grandpa and my grandma had 4 girls and 1 boy. That's my dad. So my dad was named after his dad, and he was named Donald Richard Harris. So they started this thing where every boy that was born got the same initials, DRH. So then my dad married my mom, and I was the oldest, and then they had my sister. So again, after my grandma and grandpa had all these kids, and we had this extended family with all these cousins, all of a sudden it's narrowed down to my dad and then to me, and I was named Dale Reed Harris to keep the DRH thing going. But keeping the line of the Harris name and the DRH tradition alive, well, that was my responsibility. Remember what I said about my family being really good at having girls? So we had 2 kids. You can blame Mandy for this. They were both girls. I'm kidding. But our family line and the DRH tradition that was started and meant to endure generation after generation after generation made it like 3 generations. And that's it. Gone. Now, here's the thing. My family name doesn't matter a whole lot, and there's a whole lot of Harrises out there, so our little Harris clan not existing any longer with that name isn't a super huge deal. But it was a much bigger deal for Tamar because her family line was supposed to carry the promised line of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. So that family line needed to keep going. But Tamar's dealing with this situation where her husband is dead, her second husband is dead, and the third guy she's supposed to marry hasn't even entered junior high school, and her father-in-law has no intention of them ever getting married in the first place. Tamar was dealing with major mess. And maybe this Christmas season, if you're being honest, you're dealing with some mess. Maybe you would say, you know what, my life's in a little bit of a mess. And I don't know what you carried into church this morning or what you've been walking through, but maybe you can relate to Tamar's life situation. Maybe you're dealing with an untimely death of a loved one. Maybe you're dealing with kids who've rejected Jesus and rebelled. Maybe you're dealing with a terrible marriage situation where things seem to have fallen apart, and like Tamar, it's through very little fault of your own. Maybe you're staring down a lonely Christmas because strained relationships are going to lead to empty seats around the tree. Maybe you're dealing with a financial situation where there's not much around the tree this year, and you're just wondering where the next source of income will appear from. If that's you, I want you to lean into this story. I want you to choose hope this morning, because the point of this story is no matter what mess you're facing, God does not abandon you into your mess and leave you in your mess and walk away. The point of this story is that God does not skirt around the mess. He walks through the mess so that in the midst of the mess, he can write a masterpiece of grace. And God is going to get at work in Tamar's story to revolutionize and rewrite her story, but he's going to do it in a way that no one could have anticipated. Here's the second movement in our story this morning. Tamar's life was a mess, and Tamar's solution was even messier. Now, I've pointed out a few times that Tamar's husbands, and Onan, were doofs. But the number one bad guy, the number one human villain in this story is not her first husband. The number one human villain is not Onan, her second husband. The number one human bad guy in this story is her father-in-law, Judah. Judah is the one that when you look at, you should be like, ugh. Why? Because Judah is the one who is abandoning this woman that he is responsible to care for. She's married into his family, and he is responsible to care for her. But instead of caring for her, he's like, you must be a black widow. Just go away. I want nothing to do with you. For purely selfish and fearful reasons, he's abandoned Tamar and left her to rot in her father's house. And that's how the story continues between verse 11 and verse 12 for what must have been at least a decade. But verse 12 picks up the story, and all these years have gone by. For Tamar, not much has changed. Her so-called fiancé, Shelah, is now a man. And in name, she's engaged to him. But have you ever known one of those couples that's engaged, but they've been engaged for years? And so you go up to this couple and you're like, hey, when's the wedding date? And they're like, a date? We don't have a date. We're just engaged. And you're like, here's what you have. If you have a date, you have an engagement. If you have no date, you really aren't anything. You're just kind of playing titles. And that's what was going on with Tamar and Shelah. They were engaged, but were they really engaged? Probably not, because Judah had no intention of this wedding ever going down. So not much has changed for Tamar, but a lot has changed for Judah. Judah's wife has died. And a few months later, as the story unfolds, Judah and his boy Hira decide to go to sheep shearing. And you're like, cool. What's sheep shearing? See, if you don't know the background of sheep shearing, that doesn't mean a whole lot to you. You're like, oh, that's such a cute thing where they get the wool off the sheep. But no. Sheep shearing in the ancient Near East, when you hear the dude and his wingman are going to sheep shearing, what you should be thinking is they're having a boys' weekend in Vegas. Like the slogan is, what happens at sheep shearing stays at sheep shearing. Right? Like Judah has his dude in tow and they're getting ready to go party like it's Mardi Gras Tuesday. And so these circumstances allow Tamar to kind of develop a plan because Tamar knows three things about her father-in-law Judah. These aren't flattering things, but the three things Tamar knows about Judah. First thing she knows about her father-in-law is that he'd been widowed for a significant period of time. And he was missing certain aspects of female company. And so Tamar knew that Judah was in a vulnerable place. She also knew, because she knew her father-in-law, that he was the kind of man who would pause to look at a pretty woman. Like 95% chance that his credit card had been used on OnlyFans. Like he was just that kind of guy. And the third thing she knew is that Judah had some specific plans for some sketchy stuff that he was going to do at sheep shearing. And so here's the last thing you need to know about Tamar, right? Like she's been living at dad's house for 10 years. She wasn't binge depression eating ice cream for those 10 years. Like at some point, her dad had gotten her a Peloton for Christmas, and she was rocking the thing. And so she had one of those figures that was getting posted on the gram as an after picture. And so Tamar really kind of had it going on. And so Tamar was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find a rest stop on the way to the town where they're going to go. So sheep shearing's at Timnah. And there's this rest area at Enaim, and Tamar took off her widow's garments, covered herself up with a veil, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which was a place where women of a certain reputation were known to hang out. And so Judah and his wingman stop at this rest area like Tamar was expecting. You can kind of see where this is going. Like, that's where this is going. And so Judah pulls over his donkey, and they're chilling at the rest area, and he sees this woman there, and he's like, "Sup?" She's like, "Sup?" He's like, "How much?" She's like, "A goat." I guess that was worth some money back then. So they settle on the price of a goat. Here's actually why that's pretty cool and interesting. So back in Genesis chapter 37, just one chapter earlier, remember Jacob had a kid named Joseph who was his favorite son, and he gave him this coat of many colors. And his brothers hated him, and they sold him as a slave into Egypt. But remember what they did with the coat? They killed a goat, and they put the blood of the goat all over the coat. And they took the coat to dad and said, "Hey, your son's been killed by wild animals." The man who deceived his dad with a goat was about to get played himself with a goat. So they agree on this price of a goat, but Judah didn't have a goat on him. And so she's like, you're going to have to give me something to show me that you're actually going to pay up. So I lived in the UP for 5.5 years, and when you live in the UP, like pretty much the thing that people like to do in the UP is snowmobile. And there's not a whole lot else to do when it snows like 3,000 inches every year. And so when you go snowmobiling in the UP, there was actually this problem developing up in the UP where the snowmobilers would pull into the gas station and they would pump and run because the attendant of the gas station couldn't chase down a snowmobile. And so here's what the gas station started doing. When someone would pull into the gas station on a snowmobile, the attendant would turn off the gas pumps until the person on the snowmobile would go into the gas station and actually give the attendant their helmet. And they would hold the helmet while the person was pumping gas. They'd go back in and pay, and then they'd give them the helmet back. And the helmet was kind of like the collateral to make sure that the gas would get paid for. And so Tamar's doing the same thing here in this passage. She's like, okay, if you have no goat, you got to give me some collateral. And so they settle on some collateral, and you see it there in the text. The collateral is his cord and his signet and his staff. You're like, okay, tell me about those. So your staff, your walking stick, people in that culture would engrave special things into their walking stick, their staff, that were important to that person. And so your staff would be quickly and readily personally identifiable. Everybody knew whose staff belonged to who. The same thing with your signet. Your signet was a ring. Because when you would send letters in that culture, you had to make sure that somebody wasn't forging a letter in your name. And so the way you would prevent forgery is to seal the letter with wax, and you would heat up the wax and press your ring into the wax, and your ring had specific markings on it that everyone knew belonged to you. And so because the wax was marked with a seal, you knew that the letter was being signed off on by the person who was saying that they sent it. And so when she said, I want your staff, and I want your signet, and I want the cord that goes with your staff, what she was saying is, I want stuff that everybody's going to know belongs to you. And he was in such a mood on his way to sheep shearing, he's just like, take it. He gives her all the stuff. And so things go down. This, my friends, is certainly a sinful encounter. The law had not yet been given on Mount Sinai to Moses and the people of Israel, but I think in their conscience they already knew that this was wrong. It was spelled out later in the law in Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 15 that what went down was certainly not acceptable. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law, just in case anyone thought that was a good idea. But let me be clear. The greater guilt from this sordid episode falls on Judah. Judah is the one who, out of fear, withheld his younger son. Judah is the one who did not believe that God could continue the line when he saw a mess happening all around him. Judah is the one who was living a life of immorality. Judah was the one who wanted what he wanted when he wanted and thought he could take anyone he wanted and everything would be okay. Judah was the problem. And just in case you're wondering, like, is that actually in the Bible? Like, check out verse 26. Judah said, Tamar is more righteous than I am. Like, this event falls on Judah. If Tamar bears any culpability, it's because she was left with no other option by men who had sinfully used and abused her and tossed her into the trash to be done away with. In light of what I shared a few weeks ago about divorce, I just want to clearly emphasize that point. This is why we don't drop the hammer of church discipline or even strong rebuke on women who have been abused and harmed. Because God is on the side of the oppressed and the victimized. God is a God of justice, and he seeks out the rights of the orphan and the fatherless and the widow and the abused woman, and that is Tamar. And God is going to step into her story of trauma and loss and pain and rejection, and he's going to write a new chapter. But back to the story to see how that happens. So Judah and Tamar have had this encounter. Only happened once, Scripture tells us, but he leaves and she leaves, and he sends his boy Hira back to pay up. And Hira's there with a goat, and he's asking around at the rest stop. He's like, hey, have you seen the prostitute who's hanging out here at the rest stop? And the people are like, no, there's nobody like that who hangs out here. This is a family-friendly rest stop. And the guy's asking, he's like, has anyone seen this woman? Has anyone seen? You can only search so long for a woman like that before people start to laugh at you. And so his boy gave him about a solid 10-minute search, and he couldn't find her. And he goes back to Judah, and he's like, hey, sorry, she's gone. And Judah's like, okay, cool. Gonna have to make a new staff, gonna have to make a new signet ring, but, at least it's over, right? Except, the text tells us, do you see it here in the text? Verse 24, about 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah's been wondering, like, how can I get rid of this daughter-in-law problem so that my youngest son doesn't have to marry her? And finally, he gets his out. She's pregnant, and you're not supposed to be pregnant if you're not married. So notice Judah's solution. Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. Like Salem witch trial stuff, tie you to the stake, pour gas on you, and execute you. So this is like a Hollywood movie at this point. So they're like tying her up to kill her. And as they're getting ready to kill her, Judah's like, bring her out. And verse 25, as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law. So they're tying her up, ready to kill her. She's like emptying her pockets. And she's like, hey, please identify who these are. By the man to whom these things belong, I'm pregnant. Who are these? Who do these belong to? This signet and this cord and this staff. Any idea whose these are? And all of a sudden, Judah was no longer in favor of the death penalty for having relations before you were married. I want to speak to two groups this morning, depending on which character in the story you more relate to. Maybe this morning you relate to Tamar. And there's been some hard stuff you're dealing with. You've walked a long, hard road in life. And you would say, I have been oppressed and victimized. And the stuff that has happened to me is hard. And I bear the weight of that hard stuff day after day after day. Let me tell you that there is a Savior who has borne the heavy weight just as you have. If you're a victim, let me tell you that we have a Savior who, like a sheep, was sent to the slaughter. He knows what it is to be oppressed and victimized. But Jesus said to those who are facing the crushing burden of life having been forced on you, he said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus said, I will take that weight and I will put it on my shoulders on the tree of Calvary, and I will remove it from you. If you, like Tamar, have been oppressed, give your burdens to Jesus. But maybe you would say, I actually relate more to Judah. Sinful, selfish, feeling like maybe I'm too far gone. If there was anybody in the story that you might say, this person doesn't deserve God to do any favors for them, wouldn't it be Judah? I mean, this was a complete and total doofus. He won't do what he is required to do in giving his son in marriage because he's too afraid. He won't live according to the standards he expects everyone else to live by. So hypocritical is he. He's willing to murder someone over a statute that he himself had disregarded and disobeyed. And if you were going to say there's someone that God should just pound judgment on, isn't it the man who had a woman tied up and was ready to douse her aflame? But hear this. The good news for Judah is not that Judah could somehow turn things around and undo all the wrong he had done. The good news for Judah is not that by good actions he could cover over the bad actions he had done as though he could pay the price and make things better. No, the good news for Judah is that the baby he had sinfully placed in his daughter-in-law's belly was the promise of one who would be born down the line throughout the ages. And that baby would have a baby, who would have a baby, who would have a baby. And that son would have a son, who would have a son, who would have a son, until eventually the great king would be born. And Judah would be the great, 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 great grandfather of King David. And David, the greatest king, was still only a sign to the best king, the one who would come, Jesus Christ. And that one would be the one who would not just reign on the throne, but could forgive the sins of his fathers and his fathers' fathers and all those who would come before. And that leads to my third and final point. Tamar's legacy is being a masterpiece of grace. Tamar had her son. Technically, she had two sons. There were twins growing in her womb. And as is often the case in the Old Testament, it was through the younger of the twins that the family line was counted. God did that so that no one would think that God was recognizing human effort or human merit. But it was only by God's grace, and by God's grace, the line continued through the younger son, Perez. Here's the good news. God can accomplish something in the muck of human messiness that we can't fully see until the story is fully written. Listen to what singer-songwriter John Guerra says. All my days, I've been wearing the mistakes I've made. Like a coat I couldn't throw away. I should have brought it to you. All my pain, like a fire burning in the rain, like a stain I couldn't wash away. I should have brought it to you, but show me what you see when you look at me. Show me what is real more than what I feel. We have stains, it's true, but when the light shines through, we all look like stained glass windows to you. That's what God was doing in the life of Tamar and in the life of Judah. So often we see only the gunk and the grit, but God is writing a story of grace. God drew a line through Judah that would eventually point to Jesus Christ. It covered their sin and it gave their lives meaning that transcended the few years that they lived on earth. And God wants to draw a line through your story to give it transcendent meaning as well. See, maybe this morning you would say, my family's a mess. My life's a mess. I'm not sure if I belong to the people of God. But if you think your life is a mess, let me say this to you very clearly. Welcome to the family. Because we're all messy. We've all got muck. We've all got stuff. But God is showing his mercy in the midst of our mess. That's why in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29, it says, all who have faith in Jesus Christ become children of Abraham. Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob had Judah. Judah had Perez. And it was messy, and it was messy, and it was messy, and it was messy. And then God says, it's my family. They're messy, but I love them. And it's not because of how great they are, but it's because of how wonderful my mercy is. And God said, if you belong to Jesus Christ, there's a place in the family tree of mercy for you. Claim your spot in the family of God by clinging to Jesus in faith. Way back in the 300s AD, there was an incredibly intelligent and gifted man who lived an incredibly rebellious life. So smart was he that at a young age he was appointed to a professorship in Milan, Italy. But he wanted nothing to do with the Lord. His mother, a Christian lady, was praying that the Lord would draw him back from his life of complete immorality, complete rejection. And at age 31 in 386 BC, just months before his mother died, this young man was hanging out in his garden outside and had an overwhelming urge to read Romans chapter 13. And he pulled out his Bible and began reading that chapter, and the Holy Spirit swept over him in conviction, and his life was changed in a moment. It was a man whose life was messy, but it became a masterpiece because this young man was St. Augustine, perhaps the greatest theologian in church history, someone on whom we still depend for our understanding of the doctrine of the Trinity, of our doctrine of how the two natures of Jesus fit together. His insights have shaped the church throughout the ages. He was a mess, but God made him a masterpiece. If you're in a mess, don't give up. Look to Jesus. If you love someone whose life's a mess, don't stop praying. Look to Jesus. Augustine wrote these famous words, "You have made us, O Lord, for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." As the band comes forward, why don't we just take a few moments, whatever mess you might be dealing with, and just ask the Lord to take it, to transform it into a masterpiece of mercy, into a picture of grace. Jesus, we all have stuff. We all have mess. We all need your mercy. Pray right now, Lord, that your Spirit would be speaking to us, helping us to give what we have to you. Lord, I ask that you would take our stuff, that you would write your masterpiece of mercy in our lives, to the praise and glory of Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen.